The leather chair squeaked softly as I adjusted my position, taking notes during yet another board meeting. Around the massive mahogany table, 12 men in expensive suits discussed the future of Sullivan Industries as if I were invisible. At the head of the table sat my father, CEO William Sullivan, his silver hair perfectly styled, his custom-made Italian suit immaculate as always. "Miss Sullivan," he called out, not even looking in my direction, "make sure you get all this down. We'll need detailed minutes." "Yes, Mr. Sullivan," I replied professionally, suppressing a smile as I continued typing on my laptop. If only they knew that while I appeared to be taking minutes, I was actually reviewing acquisition reports and market analyses for tomorrow's shareholders meeting. I'm Alexandra Sullivan, though everyone here calls me Miss Sullivan or the secretary. What they don't know is that I own 51% of Sullivan Industries shares, making me the majority owner of this $2.8 billion company. How did the CEO's daughter end up secretly controlling her father's company while pretending to be his secretary? That's a story of ambition, betrayal, and the consequences of underestimating the wrong person. It started 3 years ago when I graduated from Harvard Business School with an MBA and a vision for modernizing Sullivan Industries. Founded by my grandfather, the company had been a leader in industrial manufacturing for decades. But under my father's leadership, it had grown stagnant, clinging to outdated methods and missing opportunities in emerging markets. I came home full of ideas and enthusiasm, ready to help take the company into the future. My father's response, he laughed. "Sweet pea," he said, patting my head like I was still a child. "Business isn't like school. The real world is different. Why don't you start by learning how the company works from the ground up?" That wasn't an unreasonable suggestion on its face. But his idea of learning the business was offering me a job as his secretary. "It's perfect," he explained. "You'll see how everything operates, learn to handle administrative tasks, and maybe in a few years, we can talk about a junior management position." I wanted to argue, to point out that I had graduated top of my class, that I had already completed 3 internships at major corporations, that I understood modern business practices better than half his board. But I saw an opportunity. Sometimes the best way to understand a system is from the inside. "Thank you, Dad," I said meekly. "That's very generous." He looked pleased with himself, probably thinking he had successfully put his overambitious daughter in her place. He had no idea he had just handed me the perfect position to observe everything wrong with his company. From my desk outside his office, I watched. I saw the missed opportunities, the wasteful spending, the resistance to innovation. I witnessed the old boys club in action, making decisions based on golf course friendships rather than business sense. Most importantly, I saw the company's stock price steadily declining as competitors embraced new technologies and markets. My father didn't notice me studying financial reports after hours or spending my lunch breaks analyzing market trends. He didn't realize that his secretary was building relationships with key shareholders, many of whom shared my concerns about the company's direction. Then came the moment that changed everything. During a private conversation I wasn't supposed to overhear, my father and his closest board ally, James Morton, discussed selling their shares to Carlton Global, our biggest competitor. "The offer's good, Bill," Morton said. "We're not getting any younger, and the company's value isn't going up. Maybe it's time to cash out." "But what about Alexandra?" my father asked. "I always thought she'd inherit my shares someday." Morton laughed, a sound that made my blood boil. "Come on, Bill. You've seen her here. Smart girl, but she's not cut out for this business. She's happy being a secretary. The money from this sale would set her up for life. She'd never have to work again." My father sighed. "You're right. She's not ready for this responsibility. Never will be, probably. Better to sell while we can get a good price." That night, I made some calls. The next morning, I emptied my trust fund and leveraged every connection I had made over the past year. 2 weeks later, working through a series of shell companies and investment firms, I began quietly buying shares. My father and the board were so focused on their potential deal with Carlton Global, they didn't notice the steady accumulation of stock by seemingly unrelated entities. By the time they realized someone was making a play for control, it was too late. I gained my 51% majority 1 week before they planned to announce the Carlton Global deal. The timing wasn't accidental. Now, sitting in this board meeting, watching these men who had dismissed me for years, I could hardly contain my anticipation. Tomorrow at the shareholders' meeting, they would learn that their secretary had outmaneuvered them all. And that concludes today's agenda, my father announced, shuffling his papers. Miss Sullivan, please distribute those minutes first thing tomorrow. Of course, Mr. Sullivan, I replied, closing my laptop. Will you need anything else before the shareholders' meeting? He waved his hand dismissively. No, you don't need to attend tomorrow. It's just boring financial business. Why don't you take a day off? I stood up, smoothing my modest skirt. Actually, sir, I think I should be there. As your secretary, to take notes. If you insist, he shrugged. Just try not to fall asleep during all the financial talk. I gathered my things, keeping my face carefully neutral. I'll do my best to stay awake, sir. As I walked back to my desk, I heard Morton's voice from inside the boardroom. That's the problem with giving jobs to Family Bill. They start thinking they belong here. If only they knew how right he was about that last part. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly. Board members stopped by my desk to drop off reports or request coffee, each treating me with that particular kind of condescension reserved for female support staff. I handled their requests with a smile, knowing it was the last day I would ever have to play this role. At 5:30, my father emerged from his office, briefcase in hand. Don't forget to lock up, sweet pea. And maybe wear something a little more professional tomorrow if you're going to attend the meeting. First impressions matter. I looked down at my purposefully plain outfit, the kind of clothes designed to blend into the background. Yes, sir. I'll keep that in mind. After you left, I stayed late, reviewing everything one final time. The shareholders' meeting would start at 9 a.m. sharp. By 9:15, the balance of power at Sullivan Industries would shift dramatically. I called my driver. Yes, the secretary had a driver. Though everyone assumed he was just in Uber, and headed home to my penthouse apartment. Another detail my father might have noticed if he had ever bothered to ask where I lived or how I spent my salary. At home, I opened my closet and pushed aside the rack of modest office attire, revealing the real Alexander Sullivan's wardrobe. For tomorrow, I selected a perfectly tailored channel suit in charcoal gray, paired with Louboutin heels and the diamond earrings my grandmother left me. The ones my father thought I had sold years ago because secretaries don't need family jewels. As I laid out my clothes for the next day, my phone buzzed with a text from James Morton. Bill asked me to remind you. Coffee service for 30 tomorrow morning. Please be early to set up. I smiled, typing back. Of course, Mr. Morton. I'll take care of everything. Setting down my phone, I walked to my home office, a space larger than my father's at the company, and opened my safe. Inside was a thick folder containing tomorrow's presentation, ownership documents, and my new business cards. No more Miss Sullivan, Executive Secretary. Tomorrow's cards read Alexander Sullivan, CEO and majority shareholder. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by my window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, my father was probably having dinner with Morton, perhaps discussing their failed deal with Carlton Global, wondering why the buyer had suddenly backed out. Tomorrow, they would understand. Tomorrow, they would learn that the daughter they had underestimated, the secretary they had dismissed, had been quietly building her own empire right under their noses. I raised my glass in a silent toast. Here's to first impressions, Dad. I arrived at the office at 7:30 a.m., knowing it would be my last time entering through the employee's entrance. The security guard gave me his usual friendly nod, unaware that tomorrow he'd be saluting me as the CEO. The conference room was already set up, not with coffee service, but with leather portfolios containing the documents that would reshape Sullivan Industries. I had arranged everything the night before, after everyone had left. Each portfolio contained proof of my majority ownership, a detailed plan for modernizing the company, and the resignation letters I expected my father and certain board members to sign. At 8:45, my father arrived, barely glancing in my direction. Coffee ready? Everything is prepared, Mr. Sullivan, I replied, straightening papers that didn't need straightening. Board members began filtering in, helping themselves to coffee and pastries, nodding absently in my direction. James Morton arrived last, his usual smug smile in place. Miss Sullivan, he called out, be a dear and fetch me some more cream. I'm afraid that will have to wait, Mr. Morton, I said, standing up. The meeting is about to begin. He frowned. The shareholders won't be here for another 10 minutes. Plenty of time for you, Toe. The majority shareholder is already here, I cut him off, moving to the head of the table, my father's usual seat. The room fell silent. My father stared at me, his face reddening. "Alexandra, what do you think you're doing? Get back to your place." I opened my portfolio and placed my new business card in front of him. "I am in my place, Dad. The place I earned when I acquired 51% of Sullivan Industries shares." The explosion I had anticipated came instantly. Board members jumped to their feet, papers flew, and my father's face turned an alarming shade of purple. "This is ridiculous," Morton shouted. "Bill, control your daughter." I held up my hand. "Before anyone says something they might regret, I suggest you all review the documents in front of you. My ownership is legal and binding. I control the majority of shares through various holding companies, shares that you, Dad, and you, Mr. Morton, were planning to sell to Carlton Global." My father sank into his chair, all color draining from his face. How did I know about the deal? I was in the room when you discussed it. Secretaries are invisible, remember?" I smiled, retreating my laptop. "How did I acquire the shares? With careful planning, strategic investments, and the business acumen you never believed I possessed." "This is impossible," Morton sputtered. "The purchase records would have shown a series of separate investments by seemingly unrelated entities," I finished for him. "The same kind of complex financial maneuver you dismissed me as too simple to understand when I suggested modernizing our investment strategies last year." I connected my laptop to the presentation screen, bringing up detailed financial projections. "Now, shall we discuss the future of Sullivan Industries?" For the next hour, I laid out my vision for the company. New manufacturing technologies, expanded market opportunities, strategic partnerships I had already begun developing. With each slide, the resistance in the room shifted to reluctant admiration. "These proposals," one board member finally spoke up, "they're actually quite sound." "Of course they are," I replied. "I've spent 3 years studying this company from the inside, learning its strengths and weaknesses. While you saw a secretary taking notes, I was developing solutions to problems you hadn't even recognized yet." My father hadn't spoken since my revelation. He sat there, staring at my business card, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why go through all this deception? Why not just tell me your ideas? Would you have listened?" I turned to face him directly. 3 years ago, I came to you with an MBA from Harvard and ideas for modernizing the company. You made me your secretary. When I tried to contribute in meetings, you told me to stick to taking notes. Even now, you were ready to sell your shares to our biggest competitor rather than consider that your daughter might be capable of leading this company. The truth of my words hung heavy in the room. Some board members had the grace to look embarrassed. "What happens now?" Morton demanded. "You can't seriously expect to run this company." "Actually, that's exactly what I expect." I distributed another set of documents. "These are restructuring papers. Dad, you have 2 options. You can fight this, waste time and resources on legal battles you'll ultimately lose, or you can accept a position as advisory director, lending your experience to the new direction of Sullivan Industries." I turned to Morton. "You, Mr. Morton, have only one option: resignation, effective immediately. Your resistance to innovation and modernization has cost this company millions. That ends today." Morton stood up, his face red with fury. "You ungrateful little." "Choose your next words carefully," I cut him off. "Remember, I'm no longer your secretary. I'm your boss." He stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Good riddance. My father was still staring at my business card. "All this time," he murmured, "why we thought you were just a secretary? Just your dutiful daughter? Consider this a lesson, Dad. Never underestimate someone just because they serve you coffee." The meeting concluded with most board members pledging their support to my leadership. Amazing how quickly minds change when power shifts. As people filed out, my father remained seated. "The advisory director position," he said quietly, "you're really offering that?" "Yes. Despite everything, you have valuable experience. I'm willing to overlook the past if you're willing to accept that your daughter is now your boss." He nodded slowly, a mix of emotions crossing his face: shame, pride, and something like respect. "I suppose I should clean out my office." "No need," I smiled. "I'm having a new one prepared. The CEO's office needs updating for the 21st century." Later that evening, after a day of meetings, press releases, and corporate restructuring, I sat in my new office, formerly my father's, looking at the city lights. My assistant, a real one, not a secret CEO, brought in the evening papers. The headlines were everything I'd hoped for. Sullivan Industries announces new CEO. Alexandra Sullivan takes control, hidden heiress. How a secretary became CEO, Sullivan's daughter engineers brilliant takeover. My phone buzzed. A text from my father. Your grandmother would be proud. She always said you were the smartest Sullivan. I should have listened. I smiled, remembering my grandmother's words before she passed. Alexandra, dear, sometimes you have to let them underestimate you. That's when you can do your best work. The next morning, I arrived at work wearing another power suit, striding through the main entrance as employees scrambled to adjust to the new reality. The security guard did indeed salute. My father was waiting in his new office, smaller, but with a nice view. Good morning, Alexandra. I mean, Ms. Sullivan. Dad will do fine, I said, handing him a stack of reports. I need your insights on these expansion proposals. That is, if you're ready to work for your daughter. He took the reports, a small smile playing at his lips. You know, I always wanted you to take over the company someday. I just never imagined it would happen quite like this. That's because you were looking for a copy of yourself, I replied. Instead, you got someone who learned to play the game her own way. As I walked to my morning executive meeting, my first as the official CEO, I passed my old desk. The nameplate Miss Sullivan, executive secretary, was still there. I picked it up, smiling at the memory of all those hours spent quietly building my empire while everyone looked right through me. I placed the nameplate in my bag. It would look perfect on my office shelf, next to my Harvard MBA and the new Sullivan Industries logo I had designed, a phoenix rising from its own shadows. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's letting them underestimate you until the moment you prove yourself right. The mahogany panel law office felt too small for the amount of greed crowding into it. I sat in the corner, watching my siblings practically salivate as Mr. Harrison, Grandma Eleanor's lawyer, prepared to read her will. The old brass key she'd given me last Christmas felt heavy in my pocket, her final gift to me, delivered with a knowing wink that I didn't understand until today. My name is Catherine Wells, though Grandma Eleanor was the only one who ever called me Catherine. To everyone else, I was just Kate, the family disappointment who chose to become a history professor instead of joining the family investment firm. Let's begin. Mr. Harrison adjusted his reading glasses, pulling out a thick envelope. My older sister Victoria straightened in her chair, her designer suit crisp and perfect. My brother James stopped checking his Rolex long enough to pay attention. I thought about my last conversation with Grandma Eleanor 3 months ago in her Victorian mansion's library. She'd been sitting in her favorite armchair, surrounded by the antiques and art she'd spent a lifetime collecting. Catherine, darling, she'd said, her voice weaker than I remembered, but her eyes still sharp as ever. Come sit with me. Tell me about your research. While my siblings spent their visits talking about investment portfolios and profit margins, Grandma Eleanor and I would discuss history, art, and the stories behind her countless collections. She understood my passion for the past in a way my family never did. Now, Mr. Harrison's voice brought me back to the present, to the distribution of assets. Victoria and James leaned forward simultaneously, our parents sitting near the front, clasped hands in anticipation. The family fortune was substantial. Everyone knew that. What they didn't know was exactly how substantial. To my son Robert and his wife Margaret, Mr. Harrison read, I leave my summer house in the Hamptons and $5 million. My parents nodded, satisfied but clearly expecting more. To my granddaughter Victoria, I leave my Manhattan penthouse apartment and $10 million. Victoria's red lips curved into a smug smile. To my grandson James, I leave my controlling shares in Wells Investment Group and $10 million. James punched the air, barely maintaining his professional facade. And to my granddaughter Catherine. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at me, their expressions a mix of pity and satisfaction. They all knew I was Grandma Eleanor's favorite. How many times had they complained about her spoiling me? Now they were ready to see what that favoritism was worth. I leave my brass key, currently in her possession, and my eternal gratitude for understanding what truly matters in life. The silence lasted approximately 2 seconds before Victoria's laughter shattered it. A key? She snickered, her perfect manicure pressed to her lips. "That's all you get." "Oh, Katie, even I expected more than that." James joined in, shaking his head. "Well, it makes sense. What would she do with real money anyway? Probably donate it all to some dusty museum." Our mother at least tried to hide her smile. "Darling, I'm sure your grandmother had her reasons." "Yes," my father cut in, his voice stern. "She had her reasons for rewarding those who contributed to the family legacy, not those who chose to pursue other interests." I sat there quietly, feeling the weight of the key in my pocket. Grandma Eleanor's last words to me echoed in my mind. "Catherine, remember, not all treasures shine at first sight." Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "There is one final note specifically for Catherine." He pulled out a sealed envelope and handed it to me. Victoria rolled her eyes. Probably an apology for the inheritance, or maybe directions to a secret library. She laughed at her own joke. I opened the envelope carefully, unfolding the letter written in Grandma Eleanor's elegant hand. "My dearest Catherine, if you're reading this, then the others have received their millions and are likely feeling quite pleased with themselves. Don't let their laughter bother you. We both know they never understood the true value of things. The key you hold once opened a very special door. In 1942, my father, your great-grandfather, made a decision that would change our family's fortune forever. But he knew that wealth could corrupt, that money could turn even the closest family into strangers. So he created two legacies, one visible, one hidden. The visible legacy became Wells Investment Group, whose summer homes, the penthouses, all the things your siblings are currently celebrating. But the hidden legacy, well, that required someone who understood the importance of history, who could appreciate the true value of things beyond their price tag. Someone like you, Catherine. Take the key to Zurich. Go to the address written on the back of this letter. Show them the key and my letter. Ask for Vault 1942. And Catherine? Don't tell the others until after you've seen what's inside. All my love, Grandma Eleanor." I turned the letter over. There it was, an address in Zurich, Switzerland, written in the same elegant hand. "What does it say?" Victoria demanded, trying to peer over my shoulder. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it into my jacket pocket next to the key. "Just some personal memories Grandma wanted to share." "How sentimental," James smirked. "At least you got something that suits you, worthless but full of history." I stood up, gathering my things. Yes, it's exactly what I deserve. I managed to keep my voice steady despite the excitement building in my chest. "Leaving so soon?" Victoria called after me as I headed for the door. "Don't you want to help us plan what to do with our millions?" I paused at the doorway, looking back at my family, all of them so satisfied with their visible wealth, none of them wondering why Grandma Eleanor had spent her last years teaching me about art, antiques, and a history of our family's European connections. "No need," I smiled. "I have some research to do." That night, in my small apartment that my family loved to criticize, I booked a flight to Zurich. As I packed my bag, I looked at the key more carefully than I ever had before. It wasn't just old. It was antique, probably European, with intricate engravings that seemed to tell a story of their own. My phone buzzed with messages from my siblings. "Victoria, hope you're not too disappointed about the will. But really, what did you expect?" James, "Hey sis, if you need a loan, I could spare some change from my inheritance. That's what family's for." I turned off my phone and held the key up to the light. Grandma Eleanor had spent years preparing me for this moment, teaching me about art, history, and value. While my siblings attended board meetings and charity galas, I had sat with her for hours, learning about her father's life in Europe before World War II, about the collections he had built, about the decisions he had made to protect our family's legacy. "Remember, Catherine," she would say, "history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding what people chose to preserve and why." Now, as I traced the engravings on the key, I wondered what exactly my great-grandfather had chosen to preserve in that Swiss vault. Whatever it was, Grandma Eleanor had spent years making sure I would be ready to find it. Tomorrow, I would board a plane to Zurich. Tomorrow, I would discover what legacy was worth more than my siblings' millions. But tonight, I sat at my desk and began my research. If Grandma Eleanor had taught me anything, it was that every treasure has a story. And this story began in 1942, when my great-grandfather made a choice that would echo through generations of our family. I pulled out my laptop and started digging through historical records. What happened in 1942? What was my great-grandfather protecting? Why had Grandma Eleanor chosen me to find it? The answers were waiting in Zurich, and somehow I knew they would be worth far more than any amount of money my siblings were currently celebrating. The Swiss bank looked exactly like what you'd expect, all polished marble and discreet wealth. I approached the desk, heart pounding, and presented Grandma Eleanor's letter along with the key. The clerk's eyes widened slightly as she examined them. "One moment, please." She disappeared into a back office, returning with an elderly gentleman in an impeccable suit. "Miss Wells," he smiled warmly. "We've been expecting you. I'm Mr. Weber. I knew your grandmother for many years." He gestured toward a private elevator. "Shall we?" As we descended, he explained that Eleanor had visited regularly, most recently just 2 months before her death. She wanted to ensure everything was in order for you. The vault level was silent, our footsteps echoing off steel walls. Mr. Weber led me to a massive door marked 1942. "Your grandmother said you would understand the significance of that number," he remarked. I nodded. 1942. The year my great-grandfather liquidated his European art collection just before the Nazis could seize it, Mr. Weber finished. A wise decision, though few knew the full extent of what he managed to save. The key fit perfectly. The mechanism turned with a satisfying click. Inside was a room larger than my entire apartment. As lights flickered on automatically, I gasped. Art. Everywhere. Paintings I recognized from my art history studies. Sculptures I'd only seen in books. Display cases filled with jewelry that belonged in museums. Your great-grandfather, Mr. Weber explained, was one of Europe's premier collectors. When he saw what was coming, he secretly moved his most valuable pieces here. The visible wealth he left behind. The wealth that started Wells Investment Group was significant, but it was a fraction of what he preserved. I walked through the vault in awe. A money that had been presumed lost during the war. A set of Fabergé eggs that collectors had sought for decades. Gold, jewelry, rare books, treasures beyond imagination. The official value, Mr. Weber continued, was last assessed at approximately $2.4 billion. My knees went weak. I grabbed a nearby shelf for support. But more importantly, he pulled out a leather folder. There's this. Inside was a letter from my great-grandfather, dated 1942. To my future heir. If you're reading this, you've inherited not just wealth, but a responsibility. These pieces aren't just valuable, they're pieces of history, culture, humanity. They were saved not for profit, but for preservation. Choose wisely what to do with them. Money comes and goes, but legacy, true legacy, is about what you preserve for future generations. With hope for the future, Alexander Wells. My phone buzzed. Victoria calling again. I declined it, but the messages kept coming. Kate, where are you? We need to discuss the family estate management. Did you really waste money on a flight to Switzerland? Mom and Dad are worried about you. This behavior is embarrassing. I turned to Mr. Weber. I'll need some time to process this, and I'll need your help with something. 1 month later, I sat in the same law office where the will had been read. This time, I had called the meeting. My family filed in, looking irritated at being summoned. Katie, Victoria sighed. If this is about contesting the will, don't embarrass yourself. Actually, I smiled. This is about my inheritance, the key Grandma Eleanor left me. It opened something interesting. I nodded to Mr. Harrison, who began distributing folders. What's this? James frowned, opening his. Documentation of my inheritance, I said calmly. The contents of Vault 1942 in Zurich. Currently valued at $2.4 billion. The silence was absolute. Victoria's face went pale. James dropped his folder. That's impossible, my father stammered. The art collection alone is worth more than the entire Wells Investment Group. I continued. Great-grandfather Alexander preserved it all during World War II. Grandma Eleanor spent years preparing me to manage it properly. But we got the money, Victoria protested weakly. The properties. You got the visible wealth, I corrected her. I got the hidden legacy. Though personally, I think some of these pieces belong in museums where everyone can appreciate them. Museums? James looked horrified. You can't just give away billions in assets. I thought of my great-grandfather's letter. Actually, I can. These pieces were preserved for their cultural value, not their price tag. Something you might have understood if you'd ever bothered to listen to Grandma's stories instead of just waiting for her money. We could contest this, my father said, but Mr. Harrison shook his head. The vault and its contents were Miss Catherine's legal inheritance. Her grandmother's instructions were quite clear. I stood up, gathering my things. The National Gallery has already agreed to host a special exhibition. I think Grandma Eleanor would have liked that. Her favorite pieces on display for everyone to appreciate, not just the wealthy. But what about the family legacy? Victoria sputtered. This is the legacy, I replied. Not just money, but history. Culture. Things worth preserving. I walked to the door, then turned back. By the way, I'm establishing a foundation to manage the collection. We'll need a board of directors, people who understand art and history. If any of you would like to learn, you're welcome to apply. The next year transformed everything. The exhibition of the Wells collection became international news. Art historians flocked to study pieces long thought lost. My siblings eventually came around somewhat. Victoria even enrolled in an art history course, though I suspect she still cares more about the prices than the paintings. Grandma Eleanor's portrait now hangs in my office at the foundation. Sometimes when I'm working late, I swear I can see her smile knowingly, the same way she did when she gave me that key last Christmas. My family still has their millions, their penthouse apartments, their summer homes. But I have something far more valuable. A legacy of beauty, culture, and history that will outlast any bank account. When people ask about the key now, I tell them the truth. Sometimes the greatest treasures aren't the ones that shine brightest at first sight. Sometimes they're the ones that take wisdom to recognize and courage to preserve. And sometimes the best inheritance isn't the one that makes you rich, it's the one that makes you part of something greater than yourself. The day of my father's funeral dawned cold and gray, fitting weather for what would become the most pivotal moment of my life. I stood in front of the mirror adjusting my simple black dress, the best I could afford on a research assistant's salary, while my stepsister Vanessa's words from last night's wake echoed in my head. God, Sarah, couldn't you at least pretend to dress appropriately? It's embarrassing enough having you here. My father, Dr. David Chen, brilliant scientist and family disappointment, according to my stepmother Isabella, had died suddenly of a heart attack in his small laboratory on the outskirts of the city. The same laboratory where he'd spent countless nights after being kicked out of the family mansion 5 years ago, when Isabella decided his obsession with failed experiments was too much to bear. The funeral was being held at the Chen family estate, a sprawling mansion that had once been my childhood home. Now it felt like enemy territory. As I walked through the ornate gates, memories flooded back. Dad teaching me chemistry in the kitchen, conducting experiments with baking soda and vinegar, his eyes lighting up when I asked questions about his research. Well, look who decided to show up, Isabella's voice cut through my reverie. She stood at the top of the marble stairs, a vision in designer black, her perfectly manicured hand resting on the banister. Next to her, my stepsister Vanessa smirked, both of them looking more like they were attending a fashion show than a funeral. It's my father's funeral, I replied quietly. Of course I'm here. Ah yes, your father. Isabella's lips curved into a cold smile. The brilliant Dr. Chen, who chose his precious experiments over his family's reputation. Tell me, Sarah, did he ever manage to create anything worthwhile in that rusty lab of his? Or did he die as he lived, a failure? I felt my hands clench into fists, but kept my voice steady. My father was not a failure. Really? Vanessa chimed in, her diamond earrings catching the light. Is that why he was living in that disgusting little lab while we maintained the family's social standing? Face it, Sarah, he was an embarrassment, just like you. The funeral service was torture. I sat in the back row, watching as Isabella played the grieving widow perfectly, accepting condolences from Silicon Valley's elite with graceful nods and dainty dabs at dry eyes. The true irony was that half these people hadn't spoken to my father in years, not since Isabella had systematically cut him off from his social circles. And now, the priest announced, Dr. Chen's widow would like to say a few words. Isabella glided to the podium, a picture of elegant grief. David was a dreamer, she began, her voice thick with fake emotion. Perhaps too much of a dreamer. He chose to pursue his unique ideas rather than focus on our family business. But he was a good man in his way. I wanted to scream. This woman had no right to talk about my father. She hadn't seen him in the last 5 years, hadn't witnessed his dedication, his passion, his absolute certainty that he was on the verge of something revolutionary. After the service, as people began to disperse, Isabella cornered me by the refreshment table. "Now, about your father's lab," she said, dropping all pretense of grief. "I'll be sending people to clear it out tomorrow. Whatever junk you left behind will be disposed of." "You can't do that," I protested. "That lab was his life's work." "Actually, I can. The property belongs to Chen Industries, which as CEO, I control completely. Your father was merely allowed to use it out of my generosity." She smiled, showing perfect white teeth. "Unless, of course, you can afford to buy it." We both knew I couldn't. My salary as a research assistant barely covered my rent in a tiny apartment. "I thought not," Isabella continued. "Don't worry, I'll have them throw away his things with all the respect they deserve." She paused, examining her manicure. "Oh, and Sarah, don't bother coming back to the mansion. Now that your father is gone, there's really no reason for us to maintain any pretense of family ties." I left the funeral with tears burning in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Instead of going home, I drove straight to Dad's lab. The small industrial building looked shabby compared to the mansion. But to me, it had always felt more like home than that cold, perfect house ever did. Using my key, the one thing Dad had insisted I always keep, I entered the lab. The familiar smell of metal and chemicals wrapped around me like a comfort blanket. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. Equations scrawled on whiteboards, computer screens displaying complex molecular structures, and his old leather notebook sitting on the main workbench. That notebook. Dad had carried it everywhere, constantly making notes, drawing diagrams, muttering about getting the sequence right. Isabella had always mocked it, calling it his book of failures. With trembling hands, I picked it up. The leather was worn soft from years of use, the pages dog-eared and coffee-stained. As I opened it, a letter fell out, addressed to me in my father's messy handwriting. "My dearest Sarah," it began. "If you're reading this, something has happened to me. I need you to know that everything I've worked for, everything I've sacrificed, it wasn't for nothing. The formulas in this notebook, they work. The molecular stabilization sequence is complete. But there are people who would kill for this technology, people who wouldn't understand the importance of using it ethically. That's why I could never tell Isabella or go public before it was ready." My hands started shaking as I read further. The failed experiments Isabella had mocked. They were preliminary tests for a revolutionary carbon capture technology, a process that could literally pull greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and convert them into clean energy. If this worked, it would be worth billions, maybe trillions. But more importantly, it could help save our dying planet. As I read through the notebook, my scientific training kicking in, I realized Dad had done it. The formulas were elegant, the science sound. He'd solved problems that had stumped researchers for decades. This wasn't the work of a failure. This was genius. A noise outside startled me. Headlights swept across the windows as a car pulled up. Panic gripped me as I remembered Isabella's words. She was sending people to clear out the lab. They were early. I had to act fast. I saw Dad's old laptop on his desk. He'd always told me it contained his most important files. Grabbing it and the notebook, I looked frantically around the lab. What else would they destroy? What else did I need to save? The sound of voices outside spurred me into action. I spotted Dad's external hard drives in a drawer. Those two went into my bag. Then I noticed a small safe under his desk, one I'd never seen before. The combination. What would Dad have used? More voices, closer now. Keys jingling. With trembling fingers, I tried my birthday. Nothing. The handle of the front door started to turn. Mom's birthday? No. The door opened. In desperation, I tried the date Dad had first shown me, the periodic table, our special day, he called it. The safe clicked open. "Hello?" a man's voice called from the front room. "Dr. Chen." Inside the safe was a single USB drive, labeled FALSAFE in Dad's handwriting, and a small stack of papers that looked like patent applications. I grabbed everything, shoved it in my bag, and looked around frantically for an escape route. The back door. Dad always kept it unlocked for emergency exits during dangerous experiments. I slipped out just as flashlights beamed through the main lab space. In the darkness, I ran to my car, parked around the corner. As I drove away, I saw men in dark suits entering the lab, carrying boxes and equipment. Isabella wasn't just clearing out the lab, she was searching it. She knew. That night, instead of going to my apartment, I checked into a small motel under a fake name. I couldn't risk Isabella's people finding me, not until I understood exactly what I had. Setting up Dad's laptop, I began to dig through his files. What I found kept me awake until dawn. Would you like me to continue with part 2, where we see what Sarah discovers and how she begins to fight back against her stepmother's empire? The next morning, my hands still shaking from what I discovered, I made 3 crucial phone calls. The first was to Dr. Marcus John, my father's old colleague from MIT who'd mysteriously retired the same year Isabella forced Dad out of the mansion. The second was to Maya Patel, my best friend from graduate school who now ran a prestigious environmental law firm. The third was to James Wilson, my ex-boyfriend who happened to be one of Silicon Valley's most successful venture capitalists. Sarah Chin. James answered on the first ring, surprise evident in his voice. We hadn't spoken since our breakup 2 years ago, when he'd chosen his career over our relationship. I heard about your father. I'm so sorry. James, I need your help, I said, cutting straight to the point. But first, I need you to sign an NDA. An hour later, I sat in a private conference room at James' office, watching his face as he reviewed my father's data. His expression shifted from skepticism to shock to something approaching awe. Sarah, this is, he trailed off, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. This isn't just revolutionary, this changes everything. The carbon capture efficiency rates alone are 10 times better than anything currently on the market. And the energy conversion process, he looked up at me, eyes wide. Your father actually solved it. Yes, I said quietly, but there's more. I showed him the files I'd spent all night decoding. Dad hadn't just developed the technology, he'd documented every attempt Isabella and Chen Industries had made to steal his research over the past 5 years. Email threads, recorded conversations, surveillance footage, he kept everything. She tried to force him to hand over the patents, I explained, pulling up a particularly damning email chain. When he refused, she started spreading rumors about his mental stability, cut off his funding, and eventually kicked him out. But she never stopped trying to get her hands on his research. James whistled low. This is corporate espionage. Serious stuff. He paused, studying me. What do you need from me? Investment capital. Enough to set up a new company and fast-track the development. Maya's already working on securing the patents in my name. Dad had filed the preliminary paperwork before he died. But we need to move quickly, before Isabella realizes what she's lost. Before James could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from Maya, 911. Turn on CNBC now. James grabbed the remote, switching on the conference room's wall-mounted TV. Isabella's perfectly composed face filled the screen as she stood at a podium in front of Chen Industries headquarters. It is with great pride that I announce Chen Industries' breakthrough in carbon capture technology, she was saying, her voice smooth as silk. My late husband's final project has yielded remarkable results, and we expect to begin implementation within the month. My blood ran cold. She was trying to claim Dad's research as her own. That's why they were searching the lab, I whispered. They're going to try to recreate his work. James's phone chirped. Chen Industries stock was already soaring on the announcement. But I noticed something in Isabella's press conference, something that made me lean forward. The molecular stabilization sequence, she was explaining to the reporters, allows for unprecedented carbon capture rates. But her description was wrong. Completely wrong. They didn't have Dad's real research. They had whatever fragmentary notes they found in the lab, and they were bluffing. My phone rang. Dr. John. I saw the press conference, he said without preamble. She's desperate, Sarah. Chen Industries is in trouble. They've been covering up massive losses for years, using creative accounting to hide their failed projects. Your father knew. That's why Isabella wanted his research so badly. She needs a win to keep the company afloat. A plan began forming in my mind. Dr. John, how quickly can you put together a research team? For David's daughter, give me 48 hours. The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity. While Isabella basked in the media attention, we worked in secret. James secured us lab space in an unmarked facility outside the city. Maya filed patents and trademarks under a series of shell companies to avoid detection. Dr. Zhang assembled a team of brilliant scientists who'd all been pushed out of Chen Industries over the years. But we had a problem. While we had Dad's research, we needed proof that Isabella had actively tried to steal it. The evidence on Dad's laptop wasn't enough. We needed recent documentation of their corporate espionage. That's when Vanessa's greed proved useful. My stepsister called me out of the blue, her voice syrupy sweet. "Sarah, darling, I've been thinking about how awful we've been to you. Let me make it up to you over lunch." I knew it was a trap, but I accepted it anyway. The restaurant she chose screamed old money, all dark wood and crystal chandeliers. Vanessa was already there, wearing what probably cost more than my yearly salary. "I feel terrible about how things ended at the funeral," she began, signaling for wine. "And I want to help you." "Help me?" "Of course. I know things must be difficult for you now, financially speaking. And well," she leaned forward conspiratorially, "I know you have something Mother wants. Something from your father's lab?" Ah, there it was. "If you help us recreate your father's research, Mother's willing to be very generous. 7 figures generous." I took a sip of wine, buying time. "And if I refuse?" Vanessa's smile turned sharp. "Don't be difficult, Sarah. Mother always gets what she wants, one way or another." What she didn't know was that I was recording every word. That afternoon, I met with Maya to review the recording. "It's good," she said, "but we need more. We need proof that Isabella knows her announcement was false." "I might be able to help with that," a quiet voice said from the doorway. We turned to find Lisa, Isabella's personal assistant, standing there nervously. "I've worked for Mrs. Chen for 10 years, she continued. "I've seen things, done things, but claiming Dr. Chen's research, that's too far. I have documents, internal memos, emails, recordings of meetings where she explicitly discusses stealing his work." Maya's eyes lit up. "Would you be willing to testify?" Lisa nodded. "Dr. Chen was kind to me. He deserved better." The pieces were falling into place, but we had to move fast. Chen Industries was already accepting pre-orders for their non-existent carbon capture technology. They'd announced a demonstration for major investors in 1 week. It was time to spring our trap. "Are you sure about this?" James asked as we prepared for the final phase. "Once we do this, there's no going back." I thought about my father working alone in his lab, refusing to give up his principles even when it cost him everything. "Unsure," I said. "Let's end this." Would you like me to continue with part 3, where Sarah executes her plan and confronts Isabella at the investor demonstration? The day of Chen Industries' big demonstration dawned bright and clear. The company had rented out San Francisco's most prestigious convention center, and the media presence was overwhelming. News vans lined the street, reporters jostling for position as the world's most powerful investors arrived. I watched the live stream from our own facility, where Dr. Zhang and our team were making final adjustments to the real carbon capture prototype. We'd worked around the clock for 2 weeks, fueled by coffee and determination to bring my father's vision to life. "Everything's ready," James said, adjusting his tie. As planned, he was attending the demonstration as a potential investor. Maya's team is in position, and the SEC agents are standing by. I nodded, checking my phone. A text from Lisa. She's nervous. Been practicing her speech all morning. Keeps changing the technical details. Of course she was nervous. Isabella was about to attempt explaining technology she didn't actually have. "Mrs. Chen," a reporter's voice came through the live stream. "Your company's stock has risen 300% since announcing this breakthrough. What do you say to skeptics who claim the technology isn't possible?" Isabella's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "I say wait until the demonstration. My late husband's genius will speak for itself." I felt my blood boil at her casual appropriation of Dad's work, but I forced myself to stay calm. Everything depended on timing. At exactly 2 p.m., Isabella took the stage. The convention center was packed with investors, media, and tech industry elite. Vanessa sat in the front row, looking smug. "Ladies and gentlemen," Isabella began, "today marks a historic moment in the fight against climate change. Chen Industries' revolutionary carbon capture technology will transform our world." She launched into her presentation, and I had to admire her acting skills. She spoke confidently about molecular bonds and energy conversion rates, delivering the carefully memorized script flawlessly. But I could see the panic in her eyes when questions started coming from the audience. "Could you explain the stabilization process in more detail?" one scientist asked. Isabella's smile flickered. "Of course, the process involves specialized molecular sequencing. But how do you prevent degradation during the conversion phase?" Another expert pressed. "Our proprietary technology," Isabella started, but she was floundering. That's when James stood up. "Perhaps a demonstration would be more convincing." Isabella's relief was palpable. "Yes, absolutely. If you'll direct your attention to the main chamber." The massive machine behind her hummed to life. It was impressive looking, I had to give them that, all gleaming metal and pulsing lights. But I knew it was just for show. "As you can see," Isabella continued, "the carbon dioxide is being extracted from the air and converted to." The machine made a horrible grinding sound, then sparked dramatically. Emergency alarms began blaring. "Minor technical difficulty," Isabella assured the murmuring crowd. "Our engineers will." "Or maybe," I said loudly, standing up from my place at the back of the hall. "The machine doesn't work because you stole incomplete research and tried to recreate technology you don't understand." The room fell silent. Isabella's face went pale as I walked toward the stage. "Sarah," she hissed, "what are you doing here?" "Isn't it obvious, Mother?" I continued, my voice carrying in the quiet room. "I'm here to demonstrate my father's actual technology." "Security," Vanessa shouted, but before anyone could move, the convention center's doors opened. Maya strode in, followed by a team of FBI agents and SEC officials. "Isabella Chen," she announced, "you're under investigation for corporate fraud, espionage, and securities manipulation." "This is ridiculous," Isabella sputtered. "I have proof. Documents." "Forged documents," Lisa said, stepping forward. "I should know. You made me create them." The next hour was chaos. While FBI agents secured Chen Industries' fake prototype as evidence, Maya presented our documentation of Isabella's fraud. The emails, the recordings. Maya's team verified the transfer. With Isabella's shares, I now controlled what remained of Chen Industries. The company that had once cast out my father was now mine. The irony wasn't lost on me. The next year brought changes I could never have imagined. Chen Sustainable Technologies installed our first large-scale carbon capture facility in California, with dozens more planned worldwide. The technology worked better than even Dad had predicted, giving real hope in the fight against climate change. Vanessa took a plea deal and served community service at an environmental cleanup organization. The experience seemed to change her. She later started a nonprofit focused on sustainable fashion. Lisa, Isabella's former assistant, became my trusted chief of staff, her organizational skills helping us manage our rapid growth. Isabella served 3 years in a minimum security prison. Upon release, she moved to a small house in Montana, about as far from her former lifestyle as possible. She sends me letters sometimes full of regret and attempted explanations. I read them, but rarely respond. On the first anniversary of Dad's death, I visited his grave early in the morning. The simple headstone stood in stark contrast to the ornate Chen family plot nearby. "We did it, Dad," I said softly, placing fresh flowers by the stone. "Your work is helping people, changing things, just like you always wanted." That afternoon, I had a board meeting in our new headquarters. The company had grown to over 1,000 employees, and our market value had reached $50 billion. But before heading into the meeting, I stopped by my office and opened Dad's old notebook, now carefully preserved in a glass case. Inside on the last page were words he'd written years ago. "Success isn't measured in dollars or acclaim, but in the positive change we create. Remember that, Sarah." I did remember. Every day, as I stood looking out over the city, I thought about legacy. Isabella had built her empire on deception, desperate to maintain the appearance of success. Dad had worked in a humble lab, focused only on making his dreams reality. In the end, truth and dedication had won out over lies and manipulation. Real change had triumphed over empty promises. My phone buzzed. Another international contract, this time from India. More opportunities to implement Dad's technology to reduce carbon emissions, to make a difference. I smiled. touching the simple locket I always wore, the one containing a small piece of paper from Dad's notebook. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from destroying others, but from staying true to your principles and letting your work speak for itself. Dad taught me that, and it was the most valuable inheritance he could have left me. The world was changing, and thanks to him, I was helping change it for the better. That, I knew, would have made him prouder than all the billions in the world.